Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, there are various endgame mechanics or activities that you can focus on once you reach the proper endgame in the map system in Path of Exile 2. One of those is Breach, and Breach gives you great rewards if you are playing builds that do well with enemy density, which a lot of them do tend to, because obviously that's what maps are based around in the first place. Today we're going to talk about this mechanic as a whole, how to set yourself up for some very dense breaches before even setting foot on the map itself, how to focus on your breaches while they are happening, any specific tips, then we'll go over how I've spent my Atlas tree points for Breach and any variations that I might make to that in other scenarios as well. Then we'll talk about Xhest, the Breach associated pinnacle boss, how to fight them, how to avoid dying to them, and the rewards that can drop at the end and how worth it can be. Starting off then, when you are on a map with a Breach, you will see little purple globs of energy drawing you towards the Breach once you start getting close to it. Walk into the center of the little thing itself and it'll start spreading out within a radius. As the circle expands, it will reveal more enemies that only exist in this breach state, breach monsters, and this will come in all directions. Exact strategies change depending on the specific map and the speed of your build really, but you want to start by killing everything close to the starting location and then move in the direction that is the most open and empty as the breach opens up. You want to keep as much of the circle's outer radius available on the actual map that you can walk to as possible, the actual map in front of you, as that is how you will maximize the amount of monsters you can kill while this is happening, and the amount of clasped hands that you can find as well. Clasped hands gives their own rewards when you walk over them, usually just larger piles of breach splinters, and breach splinters are not only what you need to collect to fight the pinnacle boss for this activity, but also sell reasonably well at the currency exchange if you have no intention of fighting the boss more yourself. That said, when you encounter your first breach in like a tier 1 or tier 2 map, it'll be very different from properly farming breach as a mechanic in the deep endgame, as far as the density and the difficulty of the monsters, but also the rewards you can get, as the simplest way to increase your rewards from breach is to do it in higher area level maps, meaning higher tier waystones as a base, as well as any maps with the irradiated or corrupted affix to raise area level as well. With that considered, the next thought should be the actual affixes on the waystones that you use. Especially good ones for this purpose are things like increased quantity and rarity of items, and especially increased number of rare monsters, as those are your main constant sources of actual meaningful loot. You can give yourself a high chance of getting this by taking white tier 15 maps, activating an omen of sinistral alchemy, which then makes your next orb of alchemy apply maximum prefixes. Then use an alch orb on the white map. The things that boost your actual drops and enemy density or rarity are all the prefixes, whereas the suffixes are things like increased damage for monsters, increased ailment buildup, all the things that make the monsters do more damage or take less damage from you. That said, if you want waystones, those increase your waystone drop rate, but they also make maps way harder. If you want pure farm effectiveness, then you want minimum difficulty to reward ratio, which means maximum prefixes and minimum suffixes is the way. That said, before you start plopping your best waystones into breach maps without thinking further, there's a bit more to this too. Before you start actually doing your breaches, you ideally want to set up a web of lost towers to activate some good precursor tablets as well. We've talked about this process in multiple videos in the past, so I will be a bit brief here. You use maps with bad constructed layouts such as crypts or Val Factory or Augury to travel to the lost towers and take them over. I would recommend doing this on waystones about 3 or 4 tiers under where you start to feel some pressure, because the idea of this is to get through these badly rolled maps as quickly as you can. Path through the bath maps to the actual towers and make sure that you wait to stick your tablets into the towers until after you have gotten all of the towers that you plan to activate before you go for a burst of farming maps. That way you won't roll your bonuses on the maps that you are already using to travel from tower to tower, because that would be a waste. For breach, you will mostly want breach precursor tablets, and these will add breach to multiple maps within the radius, and the absolute ideal modifiers to me on a breach precursor tablet personally are the percent chance for a bonus breach per breach map in radius, as an extra breach can be worth an absolutely massive amount, as well as increased rare monsters on the map in general. Rares are just super valuable enemies, and ways to boost their spawn rates are quite valuable as well as a result. Other good options are increased breach fragments if you specifically want those, bonus clasped hands which leads to more breach fragments, as well as bonus breach density, because that just leads to bonus, well, everything. That said, it's not a bad idea to use 1 out of every 4 or 5 towers as an irradiated tablet as well to increase the area level of some of the maps within the radius too, as long as you can handle the increased difficulty level that will bring to your breaches. Moving on then, I want to talk about Atlas passives quickly, starting with your general Atlas tree. When pathing through lost towers using sort of throwaway waystones, you should swap to the more standard waystone quantity increasing tree that we have talked about in multiple videos before, mostly with a focus on increasing the actual tier that waystones will drop at, as that will give you the highest chance of getting tier 15 waystones while you're doing stuff. However, once it's time for the actual farming of the breaches, once your tablets are already set up in your towers and you have your best waystones ready to go, This is a great tree for actually increasing the quality and quantity of your drops. The main focuses here are increasing the number of rare monster spawns that you will actually have, increasing the modifiers that you have on each rare monster, as that also leads to more rewards as a result of an early patch they made after early access started, and then otherwise just increasing the rarity and quantity of items in general, as well as the explicit modifiers on waystones. What this will do is increase things like the increase to rare monster spawns that you get on your waystones. These are things like all the prefixes we were talking about earlier that increase your loot chances, so this is just really good to get. So we get more of that through here as well, and then also similar boost to precursor tablets specifically, as we went to all that time setting up our precursor tablets the way that we want to, so you may as well get a lot more value out of it by actually leaning into it with your Atlas skill points too. As for my actual breach specific skill points, I recommend trying to get these as early as you actually can rather than farming breach without them. The going rate of writing this video is around 78 exalted orbs for a breachstone, which is one boss attempt, and that's around 60% of a divine right now. It's not a small amount, but farming splinters raw on your own before you have any skill points takes a lot for the first couple of boss attempts, whereas once you have some breach skill points already, it speeds up dramatically. A sort of rich get richer situation, I know, but so you know that if you plan on farming breaches long term and you have some orbs to spend on boss attempts before doing so, it'll end up profiting you in the long run. As for my actual breach skill points where they go, my first two went into grasping hands for extra clasped hands on my breaches to increase the amount of breach splinters that I got per breach that I did. Then the next two went in frantic invasion for increase in breach splinter drops from monsters within the breach itself too, at the cost of extra damage taken from breach monsters. Then rising pyre for 40% increased monster density in breaches, as that is fantastic. And then finally crumbling walls for chances to contain 1 additional breach, 3 additional breaches, or even 10 additional breaches per breach map if you get really lucky. There are a couple of potential variations for how you can spend your skill points too. For example, if you aren't overly fast or if you're about to do breach on a map that isn't very open, you could drop the chance for additional breaches here and instead get sustained siege. This slows down both the opening and closing speed of all breaches, giving you more time to get more value out of each breach itself. But once you are fast enough and you are set up on good maps, this becomes less valuable. As well, if you are super just incredibly tanking, Waking Nightmare up here at the top of the sort of left tree here is also a consideration, as it doubles the breach splinters that drop from clasped hands, but gives you a 10% damage taken and light radius reduction debuff every time that you interact with a clasped hand inside of a breach. So if you are sure that you either have the damage to one-shot everything before it can touch you the entire length of the breach, or the tankiness that this won't overwhelm you as a debuff, this can also be incredibly valuable as an option. But outside of those extremes, this general point setup that I got right here is quite good. But first, you need to actually have the points to begin with, which means it's time to talk about xhest, the breach pinnacle boss, and how the activity works. Once you have 300 breach splinters, it turns into a breachstone automatically. Place it in the realm gate on your map device to open up the twisted domain. Like any other map you open through this, if you die in here one time, you cannot come back, so keep that in mind. Unlike any other map though, once the actual boss encounter begins, you cannot pause by pressing escape or opening up the passage tree or anything like that, so don't try any of those shenanigans against pinnacle boss fights specifically. That said, entering the twisted domain will put you in front of a breach, and once you open this, a timer will pop up once you're in, and enemies will start spawning in. Kill them while progressing forward to keep the timer from running out. It is a linear path, you can't get lost, and after a minute or two of following this breach opening forwards, you'll hit the endpoint just before the boss room. If you can handle breach at around tier 12 or 13 and above, you will manage through this part no problem, at least. There's not really any secrets to it, you just sort of gotta push through it. You'll know that this phase is nearing the end when the timer disappears, and when you reach the last platform before the boss room, a massive pile of loot will spawn in, which is pretty much just everything that you should have gotten along the way. Mostly this will be catalysts, which you can either stockpile for use, or even just sell them at the currency exchange if you're not going to use them, with a note that you can reforge 3 catalysts into a new random catalyst. So by reforging low value ones, you have a decent chance of actually coming out ahead in your rewards. The other main thing in the loot pile is likely to be breach rings, which are very powerful item bases because they can go up to 50% item quality. If you are a mana hungry class, you could get 50% quality increase on a high roll of maximum mana and mana regeneration as an example, or if you love lightning, you could get flat lightning damage, increase to attacks, percent increased lightning damage, and then even lightning resistance all on the same ring, and boost that by 50% from quality. Point being, breach rings have a lot of randomness. A bad one can be really bad, but a great one can be one of the best rings in the game, and this drops quite a few of these for you. Moving forward, we have the actual boss fight itself. After some exposition, xhest will pop out and the fight will begin properly. I won't go over literally everything, just the things that are likely to get you killed if you don't know how to deal with it, and well, I'll tell you how to deal with it. This is an attack where he curls in a couple of fingers and aims at you like he's doing finger guns while building up energy. Stay close to him and run around him in a circle. Dodge roll when you see the flash, which also has a sound cue. This is a sort of frontal cone attack right here. He does it a few times in a row once he initiates it, like the last ability. The trick to this is just to stay relatively close to him, circling around him, and if you have decent movement speed, you can avoid these no problem, really. Then we have his Pokemon summons. The first one is just an expanding circle outwards that will explode once it reaches maximum size. You can abuse this once you know the actual timing of this to get some extra damage in, but just make sure that you're not in the circle once it explodes. If you treat it with respect, it should never really kill you by itself without getting comboed by something else. His other summon starts firing out loads of ice projectiles in a circle. There are 3 sort of corridors around the arena. These provide at least a small amount of cover, otherwise just try not to get hit by these as much as you possibly can, unless you have particularly high freeze threshold. This is the root cause of most deaths to this boss. Getting frozen, especially when it starts overlapping with other mechanics in higher difficulties and later phases of the fight, is a really easy, quick way to lose. Solutions that exist for this are going out of your way for more freeze threshold. There are some passives in the skill tree that can help a lot, especially if you have a lot of energy shield, or if you are really desperate and struggling to avoid these, you can use a thawing charm. Though realistically, that'll only help you out for a short period of time after it activates, and only really for one mistake made throughout the fight because of how the charges work. Aside from that, one where he aims a giant palm above you and you will see the telegraph start to glow right when it is about to actually drop on top of you. Dodge widthwise of the hand when this happens, as it is a shorter distance than trying to dodge lengthwise. Then this one is the thing that will really start to get you killed on higher difficulty versions with lengthier fights, which is these full forearms that come out of the ground. They will wait a beat after they come out, and then they will slam on where you were standing. They ball up into a fist right before they slam, so that is your cue to dodge. They have pretty good tracking, so don't think that you can just avoid them without dodging, and like the palm slam, try to dodge perpendicular to the arm rather than in line with it. The final move of real note here, Xhest will burrow underground and you'll see some fingers sticking out as he moves around towards you. When he catches you, he will pop up and deal damage in a line. Once again, it will flash with the telegraph right before it actually goes off, so you want to dodge perpendicular to the line to avoid it the easiest way. That's pretty much all of his individually irritating attacks, though he does love to overlap a few of them at the same time, especially later on in the fight, so having a good understanding of how they work on their own will hopefully help you out when it starts getting more chaotic near the end. That said, as far as actual difficulty, as far as damage output and health bar, if you can take down a tier 15 map boss without a problem, this fight should be absolutely fine for you on its beginning difficulty. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it unless you can do tier 15 maps already, but that is where it will be absolutely comfortable, where I'm certain you won't have much of a problem. It might take you a bit of time if your single target damage is weak relative to your AoE clear, but it doesn't do crazy damage in comparison to like tier 15 maps, so as long as you can avoid the more major attacks that he does, you'll be fine. And then each additional difficulty tier feels like going up another map tier, or so in difficulty. It's not a crazy jump in anything but his actual life total, mostly just to try and make sure that you know how to deal with the mechanics themselves rather than just fully outgearing it. Finally then, let's talk about the rewards that you can expect to get from Xhest if you defeat him. First, you will of course get 2 breach skill points to spend in the breach section of your Atlas skill tree the first time you kill him on each difficulty level, but then there's also proper loot. These items have their own rarity, of course. They aren't like an equal drop chance or anything like that, but the sort of jackpot best item that can come from them is the Hand of Wisdom and Action Gloves. These are a core part of any attribute stacker build, and there are some very strong ones out there right now for this. You shouldn't expect to see this drop often, but if you do, it's worth at least a couple of divine orbs all on its own for a low roll if you don't intend to use it for yourself. Higher rolls on the attributes have the value go up, and a good Val Orb corruption result can increase it even further, though a bad one can actually make it go down to like 1 divine orb. The next tier down though for value for rewards in his loot table are controlled metamorphosis jewels. The other main one is the Choir of the Storm amulet, which casts lightning bolt when you get a crit. This has an internal cooldown which stops it from being busted all on its own, but it is a core part of the ridiculous synergy build with temporalis that's been going around with super high-end players, so it does still have some trade value if you want to sell this as well. That just about does it for today, everyone. An in-depth look into the Breach endgame activity, how to make it valuable to run, how to actually go about setting it up, and then running it properly yourself. Then just everything you need to know about the pinnacle boss associated with this activity too. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and if you have any Breach-related tips of your own for people too that you'd like to share, feel free to do so in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.